Hey everybody, Cole here with Classic Mini DIY, and welcome to the next episode of the Bad Wolf Mini Build. Now on this episode, I've actually got a lot more to do than the last one. The last episode was kind of a short-lived episode. Obviously, I did some paint stripping, didn't really turn out the way I wanted it to, so the block went off to the machine shop, let the professionals get some of that stuff off of the block. Plus, I needed some new cam bearings and some other stuff like that. So off to the machine shop that went. But for this episode, I want to get into putting the gearbox back together. I'd really like to get that all buttoned up, and I'd like to get it to be kind of like a contained unit. And then I can bring it outside, do a little bit more degreasing, a little bit of cleaning, and then I can finally put a nice protective layer of POR 15 on it. Now that's going to be really, really nice. I'm quite looking forward to having that coated and knowing that that's in good shape. Not that aluminum can rust, but it does oxidize, and it's going to keep it looking nice and fresh inside the car. I'm also going to be taking out some of the suspension parts, and I'm hoping to get the wheel wells a nice clean, fresh coat of undercoating for the bottom side of the car. Now what that can do is offer some really nice protection from rust, especially on a car like mine that's driven regularly, daily. It's something that I want to make sure my car doesn't fall to pieces while I'm driving it down the road. So I'm not sure how much I'm going to cover on that. I'll probably do a before, and then I'll show you guys what it looks like after I put the undercoating on. It's not a whole lot of fun to watch me just sand away all that stuff. So aside from that, there are a few things I want to touch base with you guys on about the channel, and then some kind of fun things that I'm hoping to do here in the next couple months. So first off, you guys probably have heard me talk about the fact that I have a merch store. There should be a link popping up on the top of the screen here, and that is the link to my merch store. I've got t-shirts and hats and all sorts of different stuff on there, but I am just now expanding the store into selling used mini parts that I have lying around here in the garage. I don't have enough room to keep storing all of these older mini parts that I'm probably never going to use again, but other people might be able to use them, so I'm going to offer them at a pretty steep discount, and if you guys see anything on there that you want, pick it up. There's some really good stuff on there. There's some pretty basic stuff on there as well. So if you're interested, check it out. They could be really cool, and I'll be updating that as I get more parts, take things off of the car, etc., etc. Now the next thing that I want to talk to you guys about is t-shirts and t-shirt designs. Now, I have talked about the fact that I want to do some cool t-shirt designs, and I had a neat idea for those of you who like designing stuff and who have some interest in helping to contribute and help the channel out. I want to do a t-shirt design contest. So there is a link in the description below, and that link will bring you to a Google submission. You can submit your designs for t-shirts. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that open for the next 2 weeks. So from the date that this video posts, you should see a date pop up in the corner here, and that is the last date that you'll be able to submit designs. So I'm going to run that for about 2 weeks, and then after that, what I'll do is I'll open up the designs to you guys to vote for those. Now keep in mind, I'm going to be putting these on t-shirts, and I'm going to be selling them to help support the channel. So what that means is that once you submit the design, you're giving me permission to use that on t-shirts. But it's not just kind of like a free-for-all and I'm just trying to get free design. So as a thank you for the person who gets the #1 t-shirt design, I will be sending you a 7 Mini Parts gift card for $75. Or if you're not in North America and you're in the UK or somewhere else like New Zealand or Australia, I can send you a $75 gift card to the parts supplier of your choice if you're outside the US. Now for the second place and third place winners, I'll send you guys a $25 gift card, same kind of ideas, but those top 3 designs will then get used on t-shirts on the merch store. So I think it's pretty cool. I hope you guys think so too, and I'm hoping that you guys feel like it's something that you want to contribute to. Now the last thing, and in the same vein of the t-shirt design contest, I'm thinking that there should be some kind of intro that's separate from my normal intro, which you'll see here in 3, 2, 1. Now that is my normal intro on the channel, and I use it off and on, and really there's no rhyme or reason to when I use it currently. It's basically when I remember to put it in there or when it makes sense. But for the Bad Wolf mini build, it's its own kind of segment. It's its own series, and I thought it might be cool to have a special intro for that. So what I'm thinking is that, granted, I can just go through all the footage I have so far and kind of piece together a Bad Wolf mini build, like intro kind of thing, but as a way to get you guys involved with the channel and have you guys do something cool that will be seen by lots of people, everyone who watches these episodes, I was thinking you guys might be interested in creating an intro. So I have another Google submission. There are 2 links down there, so there'll be one for the t-shirt design and then one for the intro design. And both of those links will have details about how to submit, what to submit, formats, lengths, all that stuff. But the general idea is like 5 to 10 seconds long, have an intro that kind of just gets people amped for the upcoming episode, the one they're about to watch. So let me know what you guys think. I'm pretty excited about it. Hopefully you guys are too. But I think that's enough talking for the beginning of this episode. Let's get out to the Mini and actually start working on stuff. All right, so remember that time I said I was going to go outside and do something on the outside of the Mini? Well, I ended up deciding that I'm going to tackle some of the stuff in the gearbox instead. Now, I actually thought I was filming a little bit before, but it turns out that the camera cut itself off because I ran out of space on my card. Whoops. But anyways, what I did was I put my center oil pickup in, and the center oil pickup goes down and then kind of hooks over the side here. And the center oil pickup needs to be put in with your lay gear. Now, I am by no means a gearbox expert, and most of the stuff that I'm gonna be telling you here is stuff that I've learned semi-recently, or I have literally just learned while doing this job. What you have to do in order to put that lay gear in is you have your lay shaft, which I'll pull out here. And your lay shaft is the shaft that goes right down the center of that lay gear, and it allows it to pivot and spin your gears the way that they need to be spinning. Now, I had to get a new lay shaft because the one I had some pitting on it, and since everything was apart, there was no reason for me not to just go ahead and replace this shaft. It's not expensive, and it's totally worth doing if you are rebuilding a gearbox. Now, when you install this lay gear, before you set it down in here, you also have to install 2 little bearing races, and on the rod change gearbox there's one larger side that goes on this side and one of these that's a little bit smaller that goes on the end that's closest to the left side of your gearbox if you're looking at it in the way that it sits in your car. So this is the kind of front of the gearbox, the side that faces your grill, and this is the back with the differential. And that allows the lay gear to sit on the lay shaft and spin. Now, like I said, the center oil pickup, or whatever oil pickup you have, has to go in at the same time that the lay gear goes in. Otherwise, it gets really funky and it's just super difficult to put in there. Now, I have left this loose because I need to put a gasket in between this oil pickup and the side of the gearbox. But there was one thing that I was waiting for, and it was very, very important. And lucky for you, I actually had to replace this part before this all goes back together. Now, what this is a thrust washer. And this thrust washer gets placed in right here, and it slides down into that little tab there, and the lay shaft actually passes through it. But in order for this to be in spec and kind of properly built up, the end float has to actually be between 0.003 and 0.006. And that is the space in between your lay shaft and this thrust washer right here. Now, in my case, I was at 0.009, which is too far out, and that slack needed to be taken up. So I have discarded or set aside this thrust washer, and then I picked up a new one, which is DAM 3183, and this is going to sit down in there, and ideally it's going to take up the slack and make sure that that infloat's correct. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put some assembly lube on this thing, as usual, as per the norm for all these parts as you're building them. Go ahead and put that in there. And we're going to slide that right down, right in between the lay gear and the case. Now we'll take the lay shaft and we'll try and locate that hole and slide this down and into that thrust washer. Now at this point, we'll be able to measure that end float. And you can see here, this tab is able to move a little bit here. That's okay. That is what it's supposed to do. And then what you'll do is you'll press these two pieces apart just a little bit, and then we're going to measure with our feeler gauge the space in between your lay gear and that thrust washer. Now in this case, I've measured 0.003. That's kind of fallen in there. Next, we're going to measure 0.004. Realistically, we're just going to keep moving up these thrust sizes until we find one that fits in there properly. And the way you know if something's the correct infloat, and the way you can actually measure this, is by feeling if there's a little bit of resistance. If you do have a little bit resistance, but it's not getting perfectly stuck in there or anything, that's how you know that that is the measurement of that infloat. And in this case, I've got 0.005, which means we're in spec, which is wonderful news. And now we can move into putting the lock tabs on this lay shaft. And then once those are on, I'll show you guys what that looks like down here. And then we can move on to putting the retainer on the pinion gear. And I'll go over that too, because there's some special considerations with that as well. So give me just a moment. I'll go ahead and slap this retainer on here. It's really difficult for me to show you how that goes on. So I'm gonna put it on and then I'll give you a little overview. All right, so what we're looking at here is the little retaining clip that goes in between the lay shaft and the gear selector shaft. Now this retaining ring right here on the left side slides into the slots that are at the bottom of your lay shaft and the top of your gear selector shaft. Now these shafts can be rotated around, which will allow you to kind of maneuver this clip in there. And I've found the best way to kind of hammer it in is to get a long punch, slide it in, and kind of tap it in there. Now you want to line up that hole right there, and once you've got that hole lined up, you're going to be able to put your shim in there and then put your retaining ring around your pinion gear. All right, so now we're still looking at your pinion nut on your pinion gear, and in my case, all this stuff is kind of fixed and immovable, and that's because it's in gear, and that allows me to kind of tighten stuff down without it spinning all over the place. But what we're going to be moving into now is putting the retaining ring around this pinion gear. Now if you're upgrading to a larger diameter pinion gear or a smaller final drive gear, so in this case this is a 2.95, you'll need a retaining ring, a retaining clip right here that will properly fit around that gear. And in my case, you can see I bought this one and it does fit around that gear. But I had to get this one in replacement for the one that doesn't fit. And most of the time, the ones that are stock do not fit around that gear there, as you can see. This doesn't clip around there. Now, you can either machine one that you already have, or you can purchase one. I bought mine from Guessworks, and it just slides right over, just like that. Now, these retaining rings are different if you are working on a remote box. The remote box ones have a little tab that comes off the side here that's used by the gear selector. For the rod change ones, you end up having a flat one just like this. In addition to that retaining ring, you have to shim the space back here. And those of you who have done this before are probably wondering, well, if you put that retaining clip in there, how do you get the shim in? And you might have seen just then, you can slightly push the shaft back there, and it'll allow you to slide your shim in there. And what we're going to do is we're going to tighten this up and measure the infloat on this to make sure that it's shimmed properly and everything is tight and tidy. Now, in order to properly measure this, you actually have to install this, tighten down the bolts, and then measure the space with a feeler gauge. Now, this is the same concept as measuring the infloat on your lay gear. Now, you want to make sure that this doesn't have any more than 0.005 of an inch, so that's 5 thou. And if it's anything under that, that means that you're in good shape. And if there's any more than 0.005, what you'll need to do is add more shims. It's pretty straightforward, but let's go ahead and put a shim in there. We're going to tighten it down, and then we're going to measure it. And then if it's good, we'll loosen those bolts back up, add the washers with the lock tabs on them, which I'll show you in a moment, and then you'll be good to go. Now, one thing to keep in mind while putting this in is that one side of the actual shim is just a little bit thinner than the other side. So the top side on this box is a little thinner than the other. Now, once I get this kind of in the place that it needs to be, I press that on, and that kind of holds it in place while I take my retaining clip, slide that over, Now, one thing to keep in mind with these parts is that this is something that I like to tighten by hand. That's going to make sure that you don't strip these or you don't cause any damage to the threading. Because when you're screwing into aluminum, it has a tendency to cross thread and to kind of strip out, which is bad. Now, just like the other one, we're going to take our feeler gauge and we're going to feel the space in between the retaining clip and the body of your transmission. Now, according to my Haynes manual, these bolts should be torqued up to 13 foot-pounds. I'm assuming that's correct. I would double check in your Haynes manual to ensure that they are torqued to the correct setting for you. But over torquing these can mean damage to your retaining ring, so it's very important that these are torqued to the correct setting. Now, one thing while doing this kind of stuff, it can seem silly to do a torque spec on these bolts, especially when the torque spec is so low. But frankly, what is a little bit of peace of mind worth to you? Knowing that you properly torque these down in your gearbox and made sure that these things are not going to come out when they shouldn't while your car is driving. There we go. All those are torqued down. And the last thing that we want to do is make sure all this is good and tight, and then we're going to bend back these tabs on these lock washers. That's going to ensure that these bolts stay tight, they don't go anywhere. And this can be done in most cases with a firm hit with a chisel, and just bend those back over. Alrighty, and there we have it. We have the retaining ring all set up here. Everything is nice and torqued down. The next thing that we can do is set up our center oil pickup. Go ahead and reattach that up to the body of the transmission box, and then we can start putting some covers back on, speedometer, things of that nature. Now, the next thing we're going to be doing is attaching the center oil pickup. And now it's very important that this has a nice, clean, tight seal around this area right here on your gearbox, because if it doesn't, oil's not going to properly be funneled up through the pickup from the bottom of your transmission case up into the oil pump, which runs up to the top of the motor here. There's also a small cover on the back side, so if you get a gasket kit from 7 Mini Parts, it will come with all of the gaskets necessary for the gearbox. There are 2 different gasket sets, one for the top side of the block and one for the gearbox. And in this case, I'm using the one for the gearbox. One goes here, one goes on the other side on the plate, and then you have 2 screws that get run in and they attach to your center pickup. All right, that's nice and tight. Then all we got to do is tighten up the bolt that's over here. And there we have it. Our center pickup is nice and tight and everything is back where it should be. All right, so the next thing that we're going to be doing is reassembling the side cover here. Now, this cover has all of the gearing inside it for your speedometer, which runs up and out of this hole right here up to your speedometer and all of your gauges. Now, this cover right here goes on in a specific way, and all I have to do is remember it here. So it goes on just like that, and your speedometer system actually has to tooth in. There's a small flat side like this, and that, if you can see here, I think you can, gets too thin to the main motion shaft, which will then drive this and tell everything what speed you're going. It's all pretty simple, actually, once you get down into it, but whoever thought this stuff up back in the 50s, or I guess in this case, because it's the rod change box, it was a little later than that. Whoever thought this stuff up was really, really smart, because I can't even imagine doing this without a computer. But the nice thing about this cover here is that there's no extra stuff that you need to put in the inside here before it goes back on. Once you do this, you run this gear inside the hole that's on the side, and then you run this other gear here into the top side, so it slots in to those gears. You got to kind of work it, but then once you spin it, you can see there, well, maybe you can't, this right here is spinning as this rod spins. Pretty straightforward stuff, but you know, it all has to go back together the right way. And this is the gasket that goes on here. I'm not totally certain why this has a big, you know, collection space here. I always felt like that would allow this kind of like gasket material to break up, but it's the way it's supposed to be, and it slides onto those posts and right on to that face there. Pretty straightforward, but you can see this big cover right here covers this space. So it's actually kind of sitting in contact with oil pretty much constantly. But I don't know, I'm not an engineer. That's the way it goes on, that's the way it goes on. So I'm gonna do the same thing I do with all of my other gaskets, which is adding a nice helping of the Permatex onto this. We'll slide that on, we'll slide the cover on. At the same time, we'll be lining up this flat side with the motion shaft. Now, like I do with all of my transmission stuff, I tighten that up by hand, and as you can see, this is still uncovered, this is still uncovered, and then you have these three studs here, one of which was on this actual cover, and these other two are passing through. And what that's used for is the bracket that holds your radiator system on. So ultimately, that slides right over. But before we can put that on, we have to put the cover on this side of your speedometer. And that's pretty straightforward. You have another gasket, and that gasket gets mounted on here, just like all the other ones. I'm gonna coat it just like all the other ones. And then you have a small little plate that goes on and covers that special speedometer hole. And now the last thing that we're going to want to do here is put in our speedometer gearing and then go ahead and button up this last hole. Now, as you can see here, I just tossed a little bit of assembly lube in there, and that's just to make sure that this is nice and lubricated, everything spins the way it should. I'm going to go ahead and add it to the gear as well. It's just a little added precaution. I mean, your speedometer is not the end of the world if it stops working, but at the same time, you want to work in speedometer, obviously. So that slides in there. It should slide right into that gear pretty easily. If it doesn't, then go ahead and take it out and kind of see what would be obstructing it, but there's only so much that could be obstructing this at this point. And so I am going to kind of wipe all that stuff off so we have a good face for our gasket. And this, just like all the other places, has its own gasket. It has a special threaded cover, so that slides on there pretty simply. It has a rubber gaiter in it. If that rubber gaiter is missing, you're going to leak oil there, so make sure that that's there. And then you also have a small retaining clip. So this slides on, pretty straightforward, easy peasy. And there you have it. This side of the transmission is done. The inside of the transmission is done. All we have to do now is the differential side. So let's move on to the diff, and I'll show you guys how to put that in, as well as adjusting the end float on your differential and getting all of that buttoned up so your gearbox is ready to go back in your car. All right, so unfortunately the gearbox is not gonna get done today. The differential didn't end up getting here in time. Unfortunately, with the Memorial Day holiday, it just got delayed and it's not gonna get here until Tuesday. What that means is I can't finish that gearbox. The episode's already pretty long, so I figured that was probably a good spot to cap it for today. I have a lot of stuff that I'm about to be doing. In fact, I have a lot that I'm going to be doing today. I'm actually filming the next episode and maybe the one after that all in one day. So stay tuned. I'm going to be releasing those throughout the week, most likely. But don't forget, in the comment section below, I have 2 links, one for a submission for the intro, if you want to submit an intro, and then I have another one for a submission for a t-shirt design, if that's something that you'd like to do. So before I wrap up, the last thing I want to mention is that I want to thank my patrons, the people who are on Patreon, who are supporting me every month. That money really, really helps me out. These projects are very expensive, and keeping up a cadence and making sure that I have lots of cool content for you guys turns out to be very expensive. So if you like what I'm doing, head over to my Patreon. You should see a link pop up in the corner here. You can donate any amount. If you want to only do it for a month, that's fine. If you want to do it more long term, literally any amount is super, super welcome. So with that, that's it for this episode. I will catch you guys on the next one, and until then, enjoy those minis and motor on.